Okay, some people are still joining us, but we will go ahead and get started so we have enough time tonight. So hello all, my name is Mimi Mudd, and I want to welcome you to the final webinar of the 2023 Spring Family Webinar Series. Tonight, I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Tom Brounk, Director of Mental Health Services. We are excited that you've chosen to join us for tonight's conversation about mental health services. I have some just housekeeping information before we get started. So first, we want to make sure you know how to submit questions during this webinar. You'll notice that we have given you the ability to ask questions via a Q&A feature. Our professional staff within student transitions and family programs is going to be helping field those questions. So please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar as they pop up into your head in the Q&A feature. To make sure you all know how to use the Q&A feature, we're going to ask you to please share the city from which you're watching, and then we'll name a few of them live on air. Second, we will be showing a PowerPoint created by our panelists during tonight's webinar. However, if you prefer to download this PowerPoint and follow along on your own, please use the link that we're going to be sharing in the chat. As a note, in the chat feature, we'll be sharing links and email addresses for the duration of the webinar, so always feel free to kind of check in there to see what information you can look at. Third, this webinar is being recorded live. Next week, it will be uploaded to the families.wustl.edu website. And in a moment, we'll be hearing from our panelists about mental health services. If something he says sparks a question, don't forget to send it to us using the Q&A feature. After the presentation, we'll move into the Q&A portion of the evening. So before passing things along to Tom, I'm going to go ahead and share some of the places people are joining us from tonight. We have families tuning in from Atlanta, Georgia, Austin, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. Now, since I know you all want to hear more about the mental health services, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tom.
Hey, thanks so much, Mimi. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you late this afternoon or this evening. I really welcome the opportunity to be able to talk with parents, particularly at a time where it's pretty relevant for us to be talking about mental health issues and the stress that our students are experiencing. You know, with exams just around the corner, this is the time of the year where students start to really skimp on their sleep. They start to stop doing the routines that they typically would be doing to take care of themselves. And so it's not uncommon that we see an increase in students reaching out to us these final weeks of the semester and into the exam schedule. So I've got a whole number of different resources that I want to talk with you about this evening. And why don't we just go ahead and get started? So next slide. So first of all, I have a team of over 20 professionals, which are part of the Habit Health and Wellness Center. This is a multidisciplinary integrated mental health, and health promotion service here at the university. And we are housed mainly in the Habit Health and Wellness Center, which is actually in the heart of the undergraduate living area here on the South 40 part of campus. Though we do also provide services to our graduate students. So all told, last year we saw about 2,300 students, both in psychiatry and in counseling services, which represents about 18 or 19% of our students. So we know that in the course of 4 years as an undergraduate, we're probably seeing close to about 2/3 of the student body over the course of their 4 years. So we are a growing and well-utilized service. But on the slide here, on that left-hand side, is our psychiatry team. We have the equivalent of a little bit over two full-time psychiatrists. A couple of them actually come from our WashU Medical Center to help us out here. And then in that center of the slide is our leadership team. Myself, Brad Kinnear, and Christy Cunningham are the associate directors. Our mental health service coordinator is an open position, which we've just filled, which I personally am very thrilled about. and she'll be joining us next week. And then at the bottom of it is our care manager, who some of you may have an opportunity to speak with, because they are, her name's Holly, and she assists students in helping them to find resources off campus if a student really is going to be best served by seeking care off the Washington University campus, which I'll speak to in a little bit. And then on that far right hand of the slide is our team of mental health counselors, who are a blend of psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors. They are all licensed in the state of Missouri. Next slide. And very briefly, just what are students eligible for here at the center? We provide individual counseling. That's probably the main thing that we do, but we also provide conjoint counseling where a relationship may be an issue. And then we offer 8 to 10 different groups each semester. And this is available to all students who are charged the health and wellness fee, which if your student is a full-time student, which the great majority are, that means they pay that health and wellness fee. And part of that fee goes towards helping to defray the cost of counseling services. So there is no charge for a student to see a counselor for those first 9 visits. If a student is wanting to see a psychiatrist, the individuals that prescribe medication, then the cost will depend on the insurance. There is an option for a student if the clinician feels that they need to be seen more than 9 visits to do so. That's obviously a clinical decision, but then the additional cost would be charged to whatever your family insurance is, or if you happen to have purchased this university insurance, it's a $10 copay and there's no deductible. So it's really a great benefit as it relates to mental health. And that the same applies for psychiatry services. No free visits, but again, the copay would be $10, no deductible. Those hours, as you can see, we're open 8 to 5 most days. The first appointment can actually be scheduled online, so a student doesn't have to play phone tag. They can do that all really from the convenience of their laptop. They can schedule that appointment at any time of the day or night. You know, hopefully it's a pretty easy process for them. And then a return appointments could be scheduled at the time of the appointment, or if a student chooses not to do that, again, they could use the portal, student portal for doing that. And just to reassure you that we do offer 24/7, 365-day response to any type of mental health or medical issue. I'll be talking a little bit more in depth in just a moment about that. But if it's during the day and the student really feels like they need to be seen, you know, on an urgent basis, on a same-day basis, all they need to do is call our main number, 314-935-6695. And we do have our system set up for that a student can speak to a therapist on the same day. Next slide. A little bit about that 24/7, 365 support. We entered into a contract last November with a third-party vendor called Timely Care. They provide mental health, scheduled medical visits, also medical visits on demand. Through their Talk Now feature, they offer mental health visits on demand. There's also some health coaching component to the service. So it's really a robust way that a student can, from the comfort of their own residence hall or wherever they may be able to have a confidential, secured, private meeting with a therapist. That's no cost for the first 12 visits to see a counselor through the telemental health platform. And then additional costs, I believe they just implemented the opportunity to go beyond those 12 visits. It's, I believe, a $75 cost is the current rate for additional visits. But again, psychiatrists also offered through Timely Care. So not only here at Habif, but online if the medication is safe to be prescribed through a telemental health platform. Next slide. Let's Talk. Let's Talk is our own version of drop-in counseling. It's I liken it something to like what a student would experience when they walk into a professor's office hours. You know, it's pretty easy. They don't have to sign any paperwork or fill out any forms. All they really need to do is click on a link at one of the scheduled times, and a therapist would be available. A member of our mental health service team will be able to talk with them for maybe 15, 20 minutes, depending on how busy it is. It does tend to get busier this time of year, but it's confidential. Again, no cost. For many students that may have some anxiety about that very first appointment, they just can't sort of get it together to, have a seat in our waiting area, which is understandable. It can be anxiety provoking that first appointment. So we try to make it easy, and we see this as a bridge back to our services here at Habif. So hopefully they have a good experience and they want to schedule a follow-up after that first visit. TAO stands for Therapist Assistance Online. So this is really a set of self-help interventions that are guided, that are interactive. A student can do this in conjunction with their therapist if they're being seen here at Habif, or if they really prefer just to try learning sort of maybe meditation on their own. There's a whole really wealth of curated online videos and tutorials that will help teach students skills around the management of anxiety, maybe how to look at their thoughts versus get caught up in their thoughts. So a lot of mindfulness meditation types of interventions, but that's available, again, no charge to students. They can just, similar to Timely Care, they would just download the app from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, and then enter in their WashU email address, and that'll start the sign-on process. I mentioned our group therapy program earlier. This semester, we're running, I think, about 10 separate groups. Groups, though they can be, somewhat challenging to have, a student contemplate, but we know that actually for the treatment of social anxiety, which this academic year, our national research is showing that the main presenting concern, no surprise, of our student body, now that COVID has reared its ugly head, has been that social isolation and social anxiety. And we know that group is actually set up extremely well to help a student decrease that sense of aloneness and isolation that they sometimes can feel like they're only the one that's experiencing some difficulty. A lot of students don't talk about that, but within the context of groups in many different ways, on a number of different topics, we can help to decrease that sense of isolation. And it's really a main way of treating social anxiety. Thriving Campus. So this is actually also a new platform that we signed on to just this fall, which helps students to connect with the resources that are offered beyond what's available at Habif. So, and this could be an online resource, or it could be setting up treatment here in St. Louis. This is particularly helpful if your student already is connected to a clinician at home. They want to be able to continue to meet with somebody here in St. Louis. They don't want to be limited by our limit here at Habith, or maybe there's a presenting concern. It just requires more regular appointments, more weekly appointments, and they prefer to be able to do that off campus, and it's a specialty we may not offer here at Habith. We can certainly treat a number of presenting concerns, but thriving campus can help connect a student not only to resources here in St. Louis, but when they're at home, in Los Angeles and Austin, any of the places that you're from, this resource can also be used because it's capitalizing off of the knowledge base of counseling centers across the country. I wanted to put in just a little bit about what is going on in terms of the education of students around how to be supportive to others, and how to be of assistance to a peer if they may be contemplating or experiencing thoughts of suicide. And we have two programs here at WashU. One is called QPR, or Question, Persuade, Refer. It is a a scientifically informed approach to training others around how to be helpful to someone that's thinking about suicide, and that's available to all of our students. Our RAs have taken it. A number of different student groups have already signed up to be a part of that. And then the second, next slide. The second training is called Cognito, and this is more, it's not focused solely on issues of suicide, but really helping a student that's in distress. We offer two versions of that. One is for faculty and staff, and the other is for students. So peer-to-peer support. We know that oftentimes it's going to be students reaching out to other students for that support. And we also know that our faculty staff are really the eyes and ears for our campus community. So it's very important that they also know how to sensitively approach a student and be effective in making a referral back to the mental health service. I did want you to know that we also have a great resource of curated information that our health promotion team has put together on a whole host of topics. There's not a semester that goes by that we're not handing out these really great informational resource to our students. I want you to know that these exist. It could be helpful for you to take a look at it yourself, or to direct a student to the digital library if you think that they could benefit from it. Then I wanted to also mention we cannot possibly support students here at Washington University solely by the Counseling Center. And we will have very close working relationship with a number of campus partners. This slide just highlights three of those, probably the three of our biggest, though I can think of quite a few others. WashU Cares is a office on campus that connects with students for a whole host of issues. The one common denominator is that in some way, shape, or form, they're experiencing some level of distress. And it's come to the attention of the university. Jessica Dyer, who coordinates the WashU Cares program, also hosts a weekly meeting where a number of administrators gather together to talk about issues that have come up on our radar screen concerning students, so that we can appropriately reach out to them in a way that isn't overwhelming, and hopefully is an invitation to see what more we could be doing to assist a student. Certainly the RCDs, the residential college directors in Res Life, can be excellent sources of contact. We consult with them really on a monthly basis to assist them in their interventions with students. And then our peer counseling resource here on campus, Uncle Joe's. These are peers, students assisting other students that have received over 80 hours of training about how to be helpful and are supervised by a member of the counseling center staff. And they're open 10 to 1. And then I also just wanted you to know that we're coming up on a time of the semester, as I mentioned, where we tend to see a lot of students just need to come in and just talk maybe once or twice with a member of the counseling service. We have started a program called Rapid Access Counseling Zoom Appointments, RACSA for short, is the acronym. That begins this coming Monday, where we are opening up the mental health service schedule so that a student can actually just go online and speak with a counselor on demand. So it's sort of like an opportunity to have a 15-minute appointment without any delay, and it's actually been quite popular and worked very well, so that we can continue to see students that we know are needing to be seen, while also meeting the demand of students that are just needing an urgent drop-in type of appointment. And then please, if you ever need to get in touch with me, that's my phone number. I'm glad to receive an email or a phone call. So I know there are probably several questions that have cropped up as we've been talking. So Mimi, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Tom, for all that information. It was really helpful. I have kind of a starter question and just want to put a reminder for everybody to keep submitting questions to the Q&A feature. So a question that we know many families might be wondering, what are some signs families should look for that their student may be struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, great question. So you know your student far better than any of us could. So one thing that I always suggest to parents is that if you begin to notice anything that seems just out of the ordinary in terms of how their the frequency to which they're talking with you, the kinds of things they're talking about, they just don't seem like themselves. Something just doesn't feel right to you. I always encourage you to listen to that and trust that. Obviously, if it's connected with them talking about they're not sleeping, there's been a change in their diet, they don't look to you if you're doing some sort of Zoom call with them, they just don't, they look really tired or exhausted, particularly if this is for a sustained period of time. You know, a student can certainly have their ups and downs. We all have our ups and downs. But if this is something that you're noticing over a period of, let's say, a week to 2 weeks, then that would be a signal to have greater concern. And that would be, a time to maybe be asking some more questions just about how they are doing. Is there something going on that it'd be helpful to talk to someone about?
Thank you. So moving on to the remainder of our questions. So first one, do most students continue seeing their hometown therapist, or do they tend to migrate to a therapist affiliated with the university or in the St. Louis area?
So I think that really depends. And some of it depends on what the local laws are in the state in which that home therapist resides, because it's going to be those laws that will be able to dictate whether or not long distance counseling is something that they could continue to do. I'm most familiar with the options for psychologists, as a psychologist myself. Some of them can belong to a interstate compact now, which has actually grown to, I think it's up to 25 or 30 states now. So psychologists, if they're a part of that interstate compact, may be able to, without any difficulty, be able to continue to meet with your student. And then it can vary from state to state again, whether or not LPCs or LCSWs could continue that arrangement. But if your student wants to be able to maintain that contact and that clinician feels like it's appropriate to do so, I say try to continue to go with that, preserving that long-term relationship or that ongoing connection. That can be invaluable when somebody really knows your student and has had months of experience, or in some cases more than a year or so, a couple of years. If it becomes something where that clinician feels like it's not appropriate, that is when we can certainly step in and either arrange for, probably be helpful just to arrange for an appointment here so that we can do some evaluation and then figure out, how is the student going to be best served? Will it be something here in person in the community? Fortunately, we know the resources close to campus quite well and have longstanding relationships with several mental health professionals. So we can make that connection. We could certainly do online. You could look at your thriving campus. Does not require a student sign-on process. So you could take a look at those names that crop up, links to their private practices, and check it out yourself. But we do have a care manager here that can help with that process. And we'll meet with the student. If you want to do a call with the student and we're glad to do that as well.
Thank you. So then we had a question that was pre-submitted asking about hotline students can call. So if you could just kind of give us a reminder of what the options are for students to call kind of like in need in that moment.
Yeah. So what I would encourage would be timely care if the student feels comfortable doing so. They can download that app. And it's really, once the sign-on process probably takes about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes. And that Talk Now function of the Timely Care app, usually it's going to take on weekends, it could be a 5 to 7 minute wait. During the school day, I've tested it out and I get a response, right then and there. So they try to have their average wait time not exceed more than 5 to 7 minutes. So that is what I would encourage. That can be accessed via the app, either through a phone call or a video call. Here in St. Louis, I would, if they do not want to do that, they could call our life crisis number. Now it's, you just dial the 988 option here in St. Louis, and they would be connected to, by default, if they're using a St. Louis area code, it would go to life crisis or to behavioral response. Mental health behavioral response here in St. Louis would be another option. What we found, though, is that if a student uses their cell phone and it's not a 314 area code, then what can happen is that it will get routed to the call center for wherever that cell is registered in. And then if it were actually to be an emergency, that could slow down the response time. So then if it's a obviously an urgent situation, 911 would be something that a student or anyone that needs to summon emergency help would call. Here on campus, it's 55555 or 314-935-5555, 65, or it's a fistful of fives. That's how I remember it. So those would be the options for a student.
Thank you. And then can you reiterate what would be appropriate for just after hours assistance, especially on weekends?
For after hours assistance, so if a student wanted to talk to somebody in Res Life, they could do that. They have a residential college director that's always on call. So if it would be helpful for that individual to come over and talk in person with somebody, that would be an option. They could also, again, use the Timely Care app. Call Uncle Joe's would be another option. However, I would say that if a student was to really be seriously experiencing some sort of mental health crisis, Uncle Joe's can help them get to the individuals that they need to talk to. Our Uncle Joe's are effective in making referrals for that type of situation, but they are not going to be obviously involved in helping a student to get immediate care if there's a actual life-threatening situation. So those would be the options.
Thank you. Then we have questions about those 9 free visits. So can you clarify whether that is for like per year, or is that 9 free visits for the entirety of their time at WashU, like their 4 years at WashU, whether it's more or less than 4 years?
Yeah, so the 9 sessions renew every academic year. So it turns over every July 1st. So if a student were to be here on campus in the summertime, they could certainly start over and be again eligible to be seen for those 9 free visits. And the same thing applies for our Timely Care partners. So those 12 free visits through the telemental health platform renew every, I believe it's every August, is when those sessions renew. Well, I think that answers the question.
Yes. And then there's a follow-up one about, do students have the option to remain seeing an on-campus counselor after the 9 free sessions, or are they tend to be referred out at that
Okay.
point?
Yeah, so that would be a logical time to talk about what is going to best meet the needs of the student at that point in time. If the counselor or this at that point in time feels that it would be helpful to continue, maybe there's only 5 more weeks of the semester left and the student is then going to go home, that would certainly be a situation in which I think most of the staff would say, okay, we're going to continue to meet until you decide, until you're leaving to go home or wherever you're leaving for the summer. So the way that works is that if the student has student health insurance, we would just start charging the health insurance for the visits. The copay can actually be charged directly to the student account. So that $10 would go on the student account. Or if the student knows what their copay is from their family insurance, and we're able to verify that, again, we could just charge that directly to the student account, or if the student wanted to pay that amount via charge, they could do that as well. Just a reminder, there is no cap for the psychiatry visits. So once a student is a patient here in our psychiatry area, that psychiatrist would continue to follow them throughout their time here at the university.
And then we have a question kind of specific to that about ADHD medication. Can the doctors at Habif prescribe ADHD medication?
Okay. I'm glad that's being asked because it's something that the more informed families are upfront, the better. So during COVID, with all the restrictions and limitations that were placed on, the delivery of services, we found that it really was very important that in order to properly and fully evaluate a student for a first time medication, stimulant medication, that needed to be done in person. And so at that point in time, we did curtail the prescribing of stimulant medication here at the Health and Wellness Center. And as a byproduct of that, for a long time we're seeing an increase in the prescribing of stimulant medication on campus, to the point where it was actually impacting our ability to provide timely services to students that were considerably in very dire straits, where their safety was at question. And so there was a decision made over the back in 2020 that we could no longer continue to monitor stimulant medication here at Haveth and continue to provide those services to students that were in significant emotional need. So we are now assisting families with finding that resource in the local community. If you go to the portion of our website that is focused on ADHD, you can find online the resources that we recommend for students seeking an evaluation of ADHD, or if they just want to have their medication transferred here in St. Louis, they can find local prescribers that will be glad to assist a student and take over their care here in St. Louis. I have to say that this is a process that if you're contemplating making a transfer of the care of stimulant medication, always get started on that as far in advance as possible. As you may know, there is a shortage of certain stimulant medications right now across the country. But here in St. Louis, for whatever reason, we know that the shortage of prescribers St. Louis seems to be disproportionately affected by that issue. So the more lead time that you have, the better with finding that professional.
Thank you. So then we have a question kind of going back to out of state. If a student already has a relationship with an out-of-state therapist or psychiatrist, however, this parent or family member has come into some trouble, or like state laws have kind of prevented a student from maintaining that relationship, what information can you share about navigating these telehealth policies? And what would you recommend for students who are kind of in the midst of this with an established relationship with an out-of-state therapist?
Yes. So there are, again, depending on the type of license that we're talking about, because there are different state boards that regulate all the various mental health licenses. It's hard for me to speak to all the, to actually know all the ins and outs of the different specialty areas. We're glad to assist a student. The care manager that I spoke of is open to talking with families, and can be reached here by calling that number that I listed earlier, 314-935-6695. We can get you in contact with the care manager. Without knowing the specifics of the issue, it's hard to really comment further, but that care manager is going to know an awful lot about wait times here in St. Louis for different providers. She'll understand maybe there's a specialty area that perhaps that student really would benefit from being connected with. So we could curate the list of names that we would suggest the student call. And then we can do some follow-up too with your student in particular, and just help to answer questions, do a little sort of warm handoff if we can be helpful doing that. So hopefully that's, without knowing the intimate details, which I'm glad to talk with you. At some point, just send me an email, give me a call, and I'll make sure that we get more specific information to you.
So next we had one question kind of taking us back to those group services. Do those happen to be in person? Are those virtual? Are those hybrid? Does it depend?
Yeah, it depends. So we're offering a blend right now of hybrid and in person. I would say more students, as it relates to group, are preferring to be in person. We do have some online groups that have continued to run, and we're actually we're filling our groups more than we ever have in the past, and I think that really does speak to the hunger of it. Students just want to be able to have contact with other students, and we're glad that that we can offer this, and recognize that if there is a way to get into a group, we are going to do our best to be able to get that student in, and sometimes if it's an open group, we can get the student in within a couple of weeks. Otherwise, sometimes it's a wait until the next semester, but it's a blend right now. And you can we have a specific group page dedicated to all of our group offerings for this semester. Maybe we can figure out what that, Google groups at Habit Health and Wellness Center, and hopefully you'll get a link that'll crop up. But all that information is actually available.
And we can share that link in the chat too.
Okay.
Okay, our next question is, what can family members or students do if they're worried about another student's mental health, such as a friend or a roommate?
Great question. And this is actually, I think, the strength of the community here. Certainly, I think the more prepared that a student can be for for having a conversation, by doing the QPR training or the online Cognito training, that would be great. If the student is living in the residence halls and they have already tried to have a conversation with their friend, and this is beginning to impact the student themselves, this is not all that uncommon, where a student may actually want to be of help and get caught up in having to keep everything to themselves, and end up sort of then keeping a secret, which isn't helpful to the student they're trying to assist or for their own mental health. Helping your son or daughter to see, hey, this is well above and beyond what you can do to help, and then connecting that student with that residential college director, or maybe it's an advisor, somebody that they feel comfortable with. Maybe it could be a counselor here. We meet with students all the time. Maybe they could go to a Let's Talk appointment, and get some tips on how to be helpful. But oftentimes, if a student can just focus on listening without judgment, which sometimes is harder than you would think, but being able to listen, validate that the concerns are real, that they're worthy of getting support, just being able to send that message to another student can sometimes really be the beginning. I consider it, think about it like planting seeds. It's not going to be that first conversation that you may have, that a student may have with their friend. It may be the second or third, or but eventually you hope that the message gets across. If it doesn't, and there are safety issues involved, then we've already viewed some of the options that a student can, could make an anonymous report to WashU Cares. There's an online reporting form that is available on the WashU Cares website for being able to make an anonymous report.
So our next question is, what's the advice you have for students who might be feeling especially anxious? Specifically, a family member shared their student has been feeling anxious about their adjustment during their first year here at WashU.
Yeah. So normalize first of all. It can take up to a year for a student to really begin to find their niche. The roommate situation can have a significant impact on the ability of that student to sort of develop that community. If that's been a struggle, that very first year, if they've been able to meet and maybe make some connections with others, in other avenues outside the residence hall, that can make a huge difference. So just because that first year didn't necessarily go well, doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to make some connections that second year. And if they were maybe a little bit slow to warm up, I really encourage attending that. There's an activities fair that goes on every semester, to attend something like that, maybe to talk to the RA on the floor, to consider making an appointment with one of us here, maybe getting connected. We actually offer two sessions of the interpersonal process group for undergraduates each semester, because it's very well utilized. So if you know that your student may already be struggling with anxiety and making connections, something like that interpersonal process group could be, if they can tolerate some of that initial difficulty with that, I think any student would experience, and we can help the student to sort of develop some skills to tolerate that anxiety. Those interpersonal process groups can be really transformative. We get such good feedback about how paralyzed a student felt, and it wasn't until they actually came to one of these interpersonal process groups that things began to change for them. So that could be an option. Reach out. This would be a call to your RCD in that residence hall, the residential college director. Let them know that there's an issue. Sometimes an RCD can very skillfully and without having to divulge any information at all, can make some connections for a student, or the RA on that floor can actually help to do that. So use those resources, reach out to us.
So we had a family member note that medication can be beneficial for some students, but it's not for everyone. And so they were curious what types of alternatives to medication, like holistic approaches, might be offered.
Right. So, and this is where our mindfulness meditation series would be something that I could be extremely helpful. Within our health promotion area, we have a mental health promotion specialist who works really sort of solely on educating students around mindfulness. In the past years, I don't know if it's up and running now, we've done an online mindfulness meditation group. It was Mindful Mondays, I think was the name of that series. But I would encourage checking out, Googling probably mindfulness at WashU. Our health promotion area I know is doing some programs around that. But that would be probably the single greatest recommendation I would have. Again, our outreach program here through the counseling center will do a number of different topics. We'll offer each semester on sleep deprivation, which actually happens to be the number one issue for college students as it relates to their health. That would be an area to be talking with a student about, asking about their what's happening with their sleep. And then I think WashU Cares could be helpful there too.
Thank you. And then our second to last question for the night, we had a family member who's curious about what the mental health trends are that you've been noticing among students, especially given the challenges of recent years.
Yeah, I've already, so we know that COVID did a number on everybody. College students were disproportionately affected, just from all the sort of missed opportunities that were unfortunately occurring, right sort of in the midst of those years when developing connections and being part of a group are perhaps the most important. Disconnection, sort of students needing to help with social skills, social anxiety becoming that number one presenting concern of students, I think is just all reflective of that. We know that anxiety overtook depression probably about a decade ago. Up until that point in time, it had been depression that was the number one presenting concern. So again, anxiety is rearing its face. And as I just mentioned, sleep deprivation. Student schedules are not, unless they are well thought out, and sometimes students, even though they do well with thinking about trying to set up a routine for themselves with regular waking and sleeping cycles, that's extremely hard for a student. They doing their best, they still end up with a 8 a.m. class on one day and then a 1 o'clock class the next. So that can really throw things off cycle. That continues to be an issue. And then we're just seeing more impact of social media. And even though the cell phone can be a great way of connecting, and social media has all kinds of really positive influences, it has a very dark side to it as well. The nonstop 24/7 ability for students to be able to compare themselves with one another. And obviously we all know that what students are putting out on social media is all the good stuff, wanting to present themselves in the best light possible. And when students are comparing their own internal sense of self with the external self that others are portraying, that is a recipe for coming up short, feeling somehow less than, and like you're an imposter. So imposter syndrome has become even greater amongst college students. So that's a few of the things that come to mind.
So we're going to ask one last question for the evening. Tom, thank you again for the information you've shared tonight. Our last question is, how can family members encourage students to access mental health resources if the student is being a little resistant?
That's natural. I would normalize that and, share maybe sometimes, if we're talking about a parent conversation here, sharing your own experience with challenges and struggles, sometimes that can help to normalize. I also think about these conversations as I mentioned that metaphor earlier about planting seeds. Don't go into these conversations thinking that you have to achieve a certain goal. The more that you can stay in that place of being that listening ear, being that validating ear, stay in that place of understanding and expressing what it is that you are understanding, that can go so much farther than you possibly can imagine. Because in many cases, students that are struggling with opening up don't feel like they have a safe place to be able to talk about their concerns. So try to stay in that space, even though it's hard to do. Think about it as planting seeds. It's not just one conversation. And then I would also add one other option is that you can try using what I think about is sort of the backdoor approach. And what I mean by that is if there are other issues, like maybe the student is having trouble with stomach distress, they're having a lot of tension headaches, they're having muscle aches, they're having other kinds of physical symptoms that are somehow connected to the stress that they're under, make a referral for that. You know, once you go in and talk to the doctor or the dietitian or whomever that professional might be, they're going to know the resources and they'll make the referral themselves. So that, again, there will be another place that student might hear, why don't you try this out? Hopefully it's not the first, second, third conversation, it might be the 10th that might take root. But we know so much that if the student can make that call themselves, that's going to have such a much greater positive impact in terms of how the counseling actually goes.
Great. Tom, thank you again. Families, we hope you learned valuable information this evening. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and the recording is going to be shared at families.woostel.edu by the end of next week. Stay tuned for more information about our fall 2023 family webinar series. And you can visit past webinars and register for all of our upcoming webinars at that same families.woostel.edu. I hope you all have a good rest of your night, and thank you again, Tom.
Sure thing.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.